You take, for example, a little child, newborn child. Not newborn, but a few months later when they begin to crawl around. A child is alive. Look at the sparkle in the child's eyes. Constantly enchanted. Everything is exciting. Little things, trivial things. A child is always moving about. Its nature is mobility. Very much reflective of life itself. Life, look at life. What is life? Life is never static. Life consists of a constant breathing momentum and flow. Exhale, inhale. Life is a constant heartbeat and pulsation. A pulsating energy of contraction, expansion. Life is constant movement. And a child reflects that in the healthiest and most seamless fashion. You look at a child and you see, a newborn child, you see its heartbeat. You can see its chest heaving. You can see the lungs going up and down. Once we breathe in enough toxins, the movement begins to slow down. And interesting, as we age, movement begins to slow down. So a child, in a way, is a prototype. Or I would say, not really the right archetype. A paradigm, a paragon of what real movement is about. Constantly looking around, exploring. I remember once sitting and doing a plan, a schedule with my brother. We were talking about creating a summer retreat. And he had brought his little son along. I believe I've told this story before. He brought his little son along to join us. And he has a little son, maybe 1 year old, 1.5 years old. And there was my office. It was full of paper. So you can imagine it's a mecca for a child. A child can play around and do whatever it does, and it can destroy my entire office, which I found quite amusing, and it was a good opportunity, a good excuse to clean up my office anyway. Just suddenly, I don't know whether it was unintentionally, I turned on the screen, the video screen in our office, the television, and the child suddenly froze. This active, excited child who was turning over and upside down my entire office suddenly froze in his tracks, sat down, and looked up at the screen, frozen, like completely hypnotized. It took a split second. And I saw the child watching this television, and it was actually quite chilling. Both me and my brother were disturbed because we suddenly saw a child so alive, suddenly so dead in a certain way. And after 30 seconds, 45 seconds, my brother says to me, shut it down, which I did, I shut it. And the child still remained looking at the screen for a few seconds more, just to make sure that life has stopped. And what we saw was, interestingly, as life emerged, as life appeared on the screen, the child ceased being alive in the sense of moving about, mobility, searching and exploring. The stimulation, the visual stimulation, created this type of hypnotic trance. And I thought to myself, this is a child 30 seconds, 45 seconds of exposure. What about most kids today? They say we watch 4, 5, 6 hours average a day of TV. Throw in the internet, throw in video games, throw in all the other visuals that are overstimulating and desensitizing us. So we see action going on, action movies, superheroes, and we live action through those people, while we ourselves can be couch potatoes, sitting in our little comfort zone on our couch, munching on whatever it is that we munch. And movement is all around us. And we feel lifted by that movement as if we ourselves are moving. This is major deception. So once upon a time when we didn't have technology, there was no escape. You couldn't put on a video camera, a video machine, or a movie or a film for a child to watch. The child had to find stimulation outside of any machines, man-made machines. Children played with each other. Children interacted with their parents. So I'm not suggesting a fire brimstone attitude to technology. It's just a great contrast to not deceive ourselves into thinking just because you can get on a cell phone right now and you can text someone 1,000,000 miles away, and that you can travel anywhere you want in the world and go on vacation spots in most beautiful exotic places, that you're really moving. Because by contrast, a child may be in his own little room, bedroom, living room, crawling around, not flying anywhere, not connected to any technology, and there may be more movement going on in that child's soul and spirit, growth, than in someone who may have millions and millions of miles under their belt. You look at a chassid sitting under a talit, praying. And what do you see? You see a person who may be for hours and hours, I've seen this, under a talit praying on a Shabbos. And they don't budge from the place. but that person's soul, that person's heart, is traveling millions of miles, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually. And when you think of it that way, it takes on a whole different understanding of what is really movement. You see someone gazing at a natural beauty. It can be for hours. They're not moving physically, but what is going on in their heart, their psyches? You see someone that's maybe sitting in a chair pondering mysteries of existence. So movement is a much deeper thing than just the illusion of physically being placed to one place to the next. And the question really is are many people who are moving about a lot, travel a lot, who feel mobile and have the opportunity to really be in different places, are they really changing? Is there true movement and growth? Or perhaps this restlessness is not the healthy restlessness of a soul searching for more, the search for transcendence. Perhaps it's a restless soul running in fear, insecurity, because it doesn't trust anyone or any place to hang its hat and can't stay anywhere stuck for too long. Children who run from fire burning building, and I mean that not just in a physical sense, but in a psychological sense, are always on the run. It may appear like a free spirit, but they're just running for safety, and they're afraid to stay in one place for too long. So movement today has a very dissonant type of element where we can deceive ourselves into thinking we're really moving when you're not moving anywhere. And you could have another person, by contrast, who's in one place physically and is moving in most profound possible ways. I'm not suggesting they're mutually exclusive. You could have both. But they can, ultimately, one can create a deception and a distortion that compromises the other. So in that sense, we have to look into this in a deeper way and really understand what movement is and how one moves. So this is laying out some of the lay of the land to just get a sense of what of the theme of the discussion of journeys about traveling. And hopefully we can come away with new tools, or maybe tools that were always there, that we have not been able to access, and trying to fully appreciate of how we truly can move. So when we say the word movement, let's talk about the word movement. Movement is used in many ways. People move about. Movement is also used in music, a movement. We also use movement as in the context of being moved. You hear a story. You hear a song. You listen to a song. You recall a memory. You recollect a memory. And you're moved. You're touched. When we say we're moved, what does that mean, we're moved? You could be sitting at a lecture, hearing a brilliant speaker, and not be moved. Another person can captivate you, take you to places you could never have gone to on your own, make you cry, make you laugh. What does it mean to be moved? When we look at someone we love, when we're in the presence of people that we love us, there's a certain movement going on that is part of the natural rhythm, the natural pulsation, as I mentioned, of life. And the interesting thing is that this pulsation is facing a battle all the time, because the mechanical world, the material world, fights that mobility. So let's put this into context. The context is simply this. The soul is the epitome, the quintessential mover and shaker. The soul is a journeyer, a traveler, in the sense that it's constantly moving. It doesn't know what rest, it doesn't understand the concept of stopping. Even a stop, and everyone has to stop, is also part of forward movement. So the soul is compared to Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. The soul is compared to the lamp of God, the flame of God. It's compared to a flame. The closest approximation of what a soul looks like in physical universe is a flame. Ner Hashem. Look at a flame, observe a flame, and you see it's the only physical item, only physical entity that has the property of defying gravity. It's constantly flickering, constantly reaching upward. And were it not for the wick, were it not for some form of containment, it would expire. But when we look at a flame, the interesting thing is it alive? A flame, is a flame inanimate or animate? So the properties of the flame itself, you can say, hey, it's made out of oxygen, it's made out of other substances and elements and molecules that turn it into what fire is fire. But in essence, when you look at it, its properties are constantly moving. The same with the soul. So the soul may be made up of components, but its nature, its personality, is one of movement. So it knows no concept of stopping. That's why you have the expression tzaddikim. Ein lehem menucha lo ba'olam haza v'lo ba'olam haba. Sometimes it says Talmidei Chachamim. Tzaddikim, Talmidei Chacham, do not have, scholars and righteous people do not have rest, menucha. They don't have rest, but they don't rest, not in this world and not in the world to come. What does that mean? Tzaddikim are the closest thing to what a soul is supposed to be like on this earth. They have subjugated, tamed, channeled their own bodies to become vehicles for their soul. So a tzaddik is a natural mover like the soul is. But what does it mean not to have menucha? So to ask the question, rephrase it in a Talmudic sense, there's another Talmudic statement that says that Mashiach comes, the Messianic age, the 7th millennium is compared to the Shabbos. Whereas the 6 millennia are compared to the 6 days of the week, work days. Shabbos is Yom Shekulei Shabbos, Umanucha L'chai Elamim. The 7th millennia will be a millennia that is like a complete day, in this sense, a complete millennia of rest, of menucha, l'chai elamim, forever and ever. The same word used, menucha. So how do we reconcile that? It says, tzaddikim, Talmidei Chacham, don't have any menucha, same word, any peace or tranquility or not in this world, not in the world to come. And then we say in the world to come, which includes the Messianic age, it will be a day of kulei menucha. How do you ein la menucha and kulei menucha are seemingly diametric opposites? One of the beautiful answers given to this is, I believe the Marsha says at the end of the Talmud, the tractate Talmud, where that second statement that the Yom Shekulei Shabbos U'Menucha L'chai Elamim is stated, that tzaddikim will be at peace with not having peace. In other words, there are two types of restlessness. There are two types of lack of peace. One is a person who's, I mentioned, constant fear, or not even constant fear, but ongoing fear, always running, afraid. Psychologically, anyone growing up in a very abusive or in a very dysfunctional or unstable environment and home is running. They had to run as a child, and they always run until they learn to build a safety net, to build a trusting place, trusting oasis, a hearth, a nest where they can rest. But as long as they still have that contact, they still have that sense of fear and security, they're always running. They may appear calm, but they will always have a back door. You may know such people. Unfortunately, we have many people like that today. I'm sure all of us have elements of it. That type of fear, insecurity. It may not be loud fear in the sense, oh, I'm terrified, I have nightmares. Some people have that as well. It may not be in the form of panic attacks, but it's definitely a force that's not coming necessarily from a healthy movement. It's coming from a place which is based on fear and running for your life, which can be an unbelievable impetus and catalyst for movement. But the movement itself is not necessarily one where you're looking for, like the soul flickering to transcend and find something deeper. That's one type of no menucha. That type of no menucha and lack of menucha and peace is the barometer of knowing that it's unhealthy is it's demoralizing. It weakens us. It drains and wears us down. Then there's the tzaddik's lack of menucha. The tzaddik's lack of menucha is exact opposite. It is a lack of peace that is empowering, strengthening, and a motivation for constant growth. It's not fighting demons. It's not fighting darkness. It's not wearing you down and draining you. It's tzaddik's constant search for the infinite journey called finding the essence. Being that yelcha mechayel al chayel, going from strength to strength, the searches for the infinite, the searches for the divine, which has no end, the journey never stops. In our world, we live in a material world, a finite world, so there are stops and breaks. We have weekends, we have end of the year, we have holidays, we have projects, beginnings and ends, deadlines, which are man-made superimposed elements that are necessary to keep a certain parameter. But the idea of a type of endless journey requires obviously an endless objective. The endless objective of finding God, finding the divine, is what a tzaddik aspires to. This doesn't mean, I should qualify, that it's a constant movement in the sense of constantly running or constantly traveling. There are stops and gaps and breaks, but they're all part of the forward movement. You find this right in the beginning of the book of Leviticus, Vayikra. Rashi brings and cites that when God taught Moses, the reason we have breaks in the Torah scroll, if you ever see a Torah scroll, you'll see it's not just a flowing text, but there are stops and breaks, that these hafsakim, these hafsakis, are breaks where God stopped and paused when he was teaching Moses Torah. As he was 40 days, 40 nights on Mount Sinai, he paused to allow Moses to absorb, to integrate. So those pauses are like the pauses where a teacher will share something with you, allow you to absorb it, allow you to reflect on it. Similar to when a person, let's say, eats. You don't just eat in one bite. You eat bite by bite, spoon-fed, and allow it to digest it until you take the next bite. When you move forward and you walk, sometimes you stop for a moment, or there's the short pauses between steps, all part of forward movement. That's not to be confused with someone who gets frozen or paralyzed in one place. I remember once at one of my classes, a funny thing happened. We had seltzer bottles on the table. And seltzer bottles, especially if somebody, let's put it this way, played around with the pressure within the bottle. So somebody opened up the seltzer bottle at his own peril, and instead of the seltzer ending up in the cup, it ended up all over his body. Being that it's seltzer, no stains, so he was drenched almost, I would say the entire bottle, but the bottle was all a lot of pressure, and he just opened it up and it was all over him. I'm sure it's happened to all of us at some point. Anyway, it was a great opportunity to give a class on that topic, which was the art of opening up a seltzer bottle. It reminds me of Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. And the basic lesson was this, that when you open a seltzer bottle, not knowing, of course, how much pressure, but assuming there's a lot of pressure built up, turn twice clockwise and once counterclockwise, which means that make sure that you're constantly opening it, but always go back one step to release any additional pressure. So when it opens, it's not just comes bursting out, it'll be released by the time it's fully open. The lesson in life is very simple, my friends. It is, we all will face setbacks in our lives. We'll all encounter down time when we have to pause, when we have to reflect, when we may have made a mistake. And the key thing is that make sure that when you move forward, you always take 2 steps forward. So when you have 1 step back, 1 turn back one way, but 2 turns that way, you're making progress. Because that way, for every forward step, you're always making 1 step ahead. So 2 steps forward, 1 step back means 1. That means 2 minus 1 means that you made 1 step forward. So every step forward keeps you going. If it was 1 step forward, 1 step back, you stay stuck in the same place. And we will all have both moments. We will have times when we're motivated and driven, forward thrust. And we'll have times where we relax, or we don't feel as confident, or reflecting, or whatever it may be. So the key thing to remember is that by a tzaddik, who, as I said, is a seamless reflection, a transparent reflection of how life is meant to be lived, like a newborn child, there's constant movement. So he has no peace, but he's at peace with the fact that he has no peace, because it's a healthy form of no peace. A person who has no peace and is restless due to fear or insecurity, no, he should not be at peace with that. If he's at peace with that, that's a big problem. That's a resignation. That is fatalism. That's accepting your lot. A tzaddik knows, and a Talmid Chacham knows, that the journey is forever. Think of knowledge, since we mentioned Talmid Chacham, knowledge. A tzaddik is more of a righteous person in the sense that he's a righteous in actions. A Talmid Chacham is a scholar. Knowledge. Is there an end to knowledge? Is there a thing that you can say, I've reached the pinnacle of knowing? Knowledge is an endless journey. Not just facts. Not just accumulating more facts. Of course, that is endless. But it's also the expansion of the mind. On a qualitative level, it's endless. In the sense there's always more to learn. A mind that is advanced and developed and evolved wants to absorb even more. And ultimately, the great expression of Rabbi Yosef Albo in the book of Ikrim, Tachlis Hayediyah Shalei Neida. The ultimate of knowing is knowing is knowing that you don't know, which sometimes is taken to mean that the more you know, the higher you climb on the mountain, the more you see how little you know. But also you can interpret as Tachlis Hayediyah Shalei Neida, the ultimate knowledge is knowing the unknowable. It's knowing not just that this journey continues forever, but there's fundamental unknowable things. And you know that. It becomes integrated, it becomes personalized, and becomes something you can relate to, because it's part of the reality of your life, and so you're at peace with no peace. Your knowledge, you know that which is beyond knowledge. And that is ultimately the ultimate goal in a person's growth. Now, in this context, when we talk about this type of knowledge, this type of movement, this type of journey, clearly this journey is not one that is based on physical movement. It's the soul's journey. But now we have the problem. The problem is that as much as the soul wants to travel, as much as the soul wants to be moved by every experience, mind you, the flutter of a leaf, I should say the flutter of a butterfly, the blowing of a leaf, the wind, the sun, a particle in the air, in the whole infinity in the palm of your hand. The soul looks at everything with enchantment, because everything is alive. The soul is essentially alive, and it sees life in everything. Every fiber of existence, every cell is alive. And therefore it looks at everything in a constant moving way. It's a moving universe. It's a dynamic universe. But the soul has to contend with another voice. And that's the voice of our bodies. The voice that says, no. The voice that says that you are static. The body on its own, without the soul's perspective, is an inanimate couch potato. Psychologically, it likes to stay in one place. It's not interested in growth. And it struggles and battles with the soul and its movement. It battles in the sense it tries to convince us that no, take vacation, find ways to just slow down. It in some ways numbs and what's the word I want to use? And paralyzes the soul's constant need to breathe, constant need to move. And there's the battle going on between these two voices, these two forces, which that battle manifests in our lives. Now, especially when we have built vehicles and man-made flying machines, man-made technologies that allow us to travel very far quickly, both physically and in virtual reality, it just intensifies the body's argument that, hey, you know what? You don't need to move anywhere. You're moving, you're constantly on the move. When in fact, what's happening is the soul is asphyxiated, doesn't feel that type of dynamic energy. It's like living in a golden cage, a gilded cage, where you have all the opportunities and you can move anywhere, but you're not really moving. So when a mother cradles a child, and she does not have the opportunity to travel anywhere, but there's a love being expressed between child and mother, and there's that type of, her heart is welled up with love, or tears of love, and the child connects in that way. There's more movement going on in that scene than in many of the great movers and shakers, whether it's on Wall Street or whether it's on vacation or on travel. As I said earlier, it doesn't need to be mutually exclusive, but sometimes one doesn't allow the other to emerge, because there is a battle going on. You could say it's the battle between the movers and the battle between the paralyzers. I don't know if that's the way to phrase it, but that may be a bumper sticker that may work. In other words, the soul is a moving entity, and there's a body in the material world that is very lethargic and very frozen. And it doesn't have to be that way. Now, I'm not suggesting the body per se is a bad thing. A body also needs movement, exercise. For a body to be healthy, to breathe, circulation, it's a constant movement as well. But there's something about our personalities that becomes lazy and slothful, that turns us into what I call before couch potatoes. For example, you look at animals, they all move about exactly as much as they need to move. Their bodies, therefore, are not atrophied. There is a flexibility. Their muscles are flexed. They grow the way they should grow. Humans have the ability, with their minds or with their technologies, to travel places, and they themselves become almost soulless, empty, without that type of motivation to grow. So when we read about the chapter of journeys, it's about really discovering how to become a true traveler. So the first step, as always, is to recognize these two forces in your life. To recognize and not deceive yourself into thinking that you're a mover, that you're a traveler, when you're not. To acknowledge humbly that for a soul to travel requires a lot more than just buying tickets and clocking miles and traveling to every beautiful location on earth. Everyone should be able to travel, and I'm sure there's beautiful things in all these places, and they definitely stimulate, and they can teach you to grow and so on. But the key thing is, are you still in your comfort zone? And if you are, you have not grown. You have not moved. As a matter of fact, your travel then becomes also part of your comfort zone. You can then put it into your resume and say, hey, look, I've been here, I've been there. People have been in every part of the world. Beautiful. But if it's part of your comfort zone, then the soul has not really traveled. And the best test of it is, can you stay in your place and also travel without necessarily going there? If you must travel physically in order to move, it probably means that your soul does not know how to travel. If your soul knows how to travel, it can travel anywhere. Yes, it could also travel to an exotic place. So how do we feed that part of our soul? So interestingly, the 42 journeys was through a wilderness. If it was through beautiful countries, exotic locations, vacation spots, beaches, beautiful beaches, turquoise, blue, green seas with white sand, you can say, well, okay, God wanted the Jewish people, after they are suffering for 210 years in a terrible exile, bondage, wanted to give them the gift, an opportunity, travel, see the beautiful sights of this world. Instead, the journeys of the Bible, of the Torah, are actually quite undramatic and very unglamorous. It's through a wilderness. You ever been in the Sinai wilderness? Not exactly a place you want to spend 40 years. Yes, you go on a tour. We go on tours to deserts today, but it's a tour that you come home in the evening, that you stock up with water and all kinds of supplies to make sure you don't succumb to the harsh realities of a true wilderness and desert. But to actually travel through a wilderness and stay there and not even know when and where you're going, not a simple matter. So it's interesting that the birth of the Jewish people comes, the cusp comes is born in a wilderness. After Egypt. And why doesn't God have a little compassion? He let them suffer so many years in a beautiful country called Egypt, but they happened to be not in a beautiful situation. They were in slavery, only to take them out to another wilderness, another harsh reality called the desert. And that's where the 42 journeys take place. And that's where the Baal Shem Tov says we all go through those 42 journeys. Why wilderness? Bamidbar. This is the book of Bamidbar that we're concluding. Maseh is the 42 journeys in the wilderness. The first journeys were not as bad because they were closer to civilization, but as they continued on, subsequently it got harsher and harsher. Because it comes to teach us that journey is not just about being pleasant, it's about getting out of the comfort zone. It's about growing. And sometimes we need to recognize that through the antithesis of being in a place that's parched, difficult, and not easy. And here's a concept that is a most powerful concept that many of you may have heard of. The concept of Yeridus HaNeshama B'Guf. The journey, perhaps the beginning of all journeys, the mother of all journeys, of the soul's descent to this earth. So there's an interesting debate between Shammai and Hillel, the two classic sages that argue about many different matters. especially their students, Beis Shammai, the house of Shammai, the house of Hillel. And the argument is it more pleasant for a person to be born or not to be born? So Shammai says it's more pleasant not to be born. Nuach la'adam shalei nivra mishenivra. It's more pleasant not to be born than to be born. Or more pleasant not to be created than to be created. Hillel says, Nuach la'adam shel nivra mishalei nivra. It's more pleasant for a person to be created than not to be created. And interestingly, even though usually the ruling is according to Hillel, who's usually the more lenient one, in this case, the ruling is according to Shammai. And what is the ruling? The ruling is that it's more pleasant not to be born. So the Alter Rebbe, Likutei Torah, asked the question, what does that mean? So he answers, Nuach, the word is Nuach, pleasant. It's definitely more pleasant to live in the spiritual heights of a transcendent world where there are no concerns about health and financial worries and anxieties, emotional, psychological abuse, cruelty, selfishness, so on and so forth. Of course it's more pleasant, but it's more meaningful to be born than not to be born. It's more meaningful to be created than not to be created. So the word pleasant, Shammai is correct. This world is not a pleasant world. We all have faced difficulties. But more meaningful is this journey. Because as long as the soul remains in its spiritual habitat, it is in its comfort zone. So interestingly, comfort zone here is being used in a positive way. It's in its own spiritual habitat, but it's its own comfort zone, so it never is motivated to get out of its own natural state of being, its own natural personality. So we find this context, this theme throughout Kabbalistic and Hasidic writings, where it all talks about the need to force the soul, yes, to coerce the soul, al korcha chatachai, to leave its comfortable habitat and enter this world. And all because getting out of the comfort zone of the soul's comfort zone, allows it to thrive, to flourish, and achieve things it could never achieve in its own nest. So soul doesn't want to go, has to be commanded, has to be coerced. With telling the soul as well, one of the incentives is that you'll reach places you can never reach on your own. Using the example of Zayis, an olive does not produce oil until you press it. So getting out of a comfort zone means the pressure and all the challenges that force you to have to excel, force you to have to rise to the occasion and be the best you can be. Like a tea bag. You don't know how strong a person is until you put them into hot water. This world is a world of hot water. All the paths are dangerous. We don't know what tomorrow brings, but we know we have the strength to overcome any challenge. So it's interesting that it says, Mahalchim beina oimdim. About the soul, it says that the soul are travelers among those that are standers. So think of a traveler, one traveler around many travelers around, surrounded by those that stand. And the Hasidic texts explain, Oimdim refer to the angels, or sometimes to the souls as they are in heaven, in the spiritual habitat. And Mahalchim, the ones standing in one place, are spiritual entities, but they're staying in one space. Even if they move a bit, they move in their own orbit. Whereas the soul, as it comes down to earth, is Mahalchim. It has the power to become a traveler, because it's going out of its comfort zone, and therefore being elevated and motivated to new places that are outside of its trajectory, outside of its natural path. So here's an interesting thing. We're not just talking about movement as versus standing in one place, movement versus being stationary. We're talking about movement versus movement in your own path, or a trodden path, and movement into new areas. Abraham had moved before he went Lech Lecha, but Lech Lecha ma'atzach ma'aladadcha ma'beis avicha, to get out of his comfort zone, that he did not do. Or at least not to that extent. So a person can move, but they're still moving in their path. We all move, we have our orbit, we have our comfort zone, we have our friends, and there's movement. but it's a movement that's not challenging you to get out of your own natural habits and routines. And just to give a few examples, Rabbi Zera was a great scholar. He had mastered the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. And then the Talmud tells us that at some point in midlife, he decided to fast 100 fasts in order to forget the Babylonian Talmud so he can go ahead and study the Jerusalem Talmud. So the question is asked, since when do you have to forget knowledge to accumulate knowledge? Knowledge is accumulative. Whatever you knew yesterday helps you get to the next stage. The second question is, as a matter of fact, it's forbidden to intentionally and deliberately forget Torah, God's Torah. And the answer given, a beautiful answer, is he wasn't interested in forgetting what he had learned. He was interested in the methodology, the comfort zone. He had learned to think a certain way. Today, psychologists tell us by age 7 and 8, we already have developed our way of thinking. We haven't accumulated all our knowledge. We're not yet evolved. But the way we will think, the way we will solve problems, and each one people have different ways, has already been established based on parents, on genetics, and so on. Education, people who have helped shape us in our formative years. Rabbi Zera, a great scholar, imagine it, who had mastered an art. No, you've already mastered a way of solving problems. Why look to solve a new one? Because he was a true humble seeker. Ein lehem menucha, he was not at peace. He was at peace with the fact that he was not at peace. So he wanted to move a new way of understanding things. Jerusalem Talmud's methodology is a different type than the Babylonian. Babylonian works things through questions, through counter questions, through arguments. Through darkness you come to light. Talmud Yerushalmi is called Or Yashar. You come to light immediately. It's like a way of looking at, trying to find the conclusion initially and then going and explaining it. The Talmud Bavli, you don't know where you're at, you're confused. And from darkness, Shivani is where I sit, where I am, and from there you emerge and you try to find light. He wanted to find that new approach. These are real seekers. These are real movers. They're not satisfied, even with healthy habits. A second example in Tanya, chapter 15, he talks about the difference between serving God and not serving God. So you'd think the differences of serving God is pretty obvious. Someone serves God, someone dedicated and does what God wants them to do. And not serving is someone who is interested in their self-interest. They're self-centered instead of God-centered. No, the Talmud says something interesting, and the Tanya elaborates. What does it say? That a person, in those days in the Talmud, there was a custom to study and review your studies 100 times. 100 times they would review a Talmudic passage or other things they learned. It says, a person who reviews their studies 100 times is considered lo yavodai, someone who has not served God. That's interesting, huh? Who is an Oved Elokim, a servant of God? Someone who studies 101 times. That one time, as he explains in that chapter 15 in Tanya, that one extra time tips the scale of a stationary person to a mover and shaker. Why? Because he's gone out of his routine. 100 times studying something. We're talking about a good habit. We're not talking about doing something wrong, but it's your habit, it's your routine, it's not your comfort zone. So there's a lack of movement. Real movement is qualitative. It's not just that you'll study it one more time, is that one qualitative time that you went out of your routine. That turns him into a servant of God. So you see, the standard here isn't about just going from bad to good, it's from good to excellent, from good to great. And greatness comes only when you're out of your comfort zone. That's what the 42 journeys were necessary to go through a wilderness. Had God taken them through beautiful countries, as much as they may have deserved it, it would not have taught them the secret of life. You need to be challenged. Movement is not about physically going to places. It's about spiritually going to places, to new places. And that's why it's not contingent on how many miles you travel. It's being able to see the extraordinary within the ordinary. You don't need to go to an extraordinary site. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't go or can't go, but don't think that's the secret, that some outer extraordinary
Scattamu stanotti, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamu stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Gira musica, gira e non si ferma, come una galla do vento aitta. Attira con narina, tamburello e abbacia come sua figliola. Scattamu stanotti, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamu stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Sinni e tunu, i voti si danno, tuna poco gli beputia. Sinda affettunu, i cappotti russi e si ricordano da notti buona. Scattamu stanotti, vini come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamu stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla.